Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_U. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Curtis Thurber, whose work includes Fargo, Better Call Saul, and more recently, Dahmer on Netflix. Welcome to the show, Curtis.
Thank you very much for having me.
How did you get involved with Dahmer, the show? Like, how did you get on board with that?
Yeah, well, I first was approached by Regis Kimball, who ended up being one of the producers on Dahmer, and is a longtime editor, one of the best editors I know. And we've worked together on all of Noah Hawley's series over the years. So that would be both Fargo and Legion. We've basically collaborated since the beginning of those. So he was excited to try to get me on it. And I was excited to work with him and also to be exposed to Ryan Murphy Television, because they're sort of a legend in the TV business, and they're very prolific and have made a lot of great stuff over the years. So he called me up first and said, I really want you on it if you can do it. And I said, works great with the schedule, so let's see what happens. And I met with then Alexis Woodall, who is also one of the head honchos over at Ryan Murphy Television, and a brilliant post-production thinker who kind of guides all the episodes through the post-production process. And that's how it all got started.
I'm going to interrupt this interview for 1 second. We want to thank PixelView, one of our sponsors. They're a streaming solution for filmmakers. PixelView lets you stream your work to remote clients for easy collaboration, and it works with both on-set teams and post-production teams. With built-in video chat, you can discuss and make changes in real time and stream directly from your editing software. Or you can use the hardware encoder to stream from DaVinci Resolve or the camera on set. See the promo code and the link in the video description below. With Ryan Murphy, it really seems like once he finds people he likes to work with, he wants to keep them working with him. Like, it just seems like he gets comfortable with people and he works with them. So what was it like working with him? Like, how involved was he in the process? Like, what was your experience with him?
Yeah, it was a very positive experience. And this series basically was received very well by him from an early phase. It's a show that what he was saying, he had been interested in making a show like this for a while. He's very fascinated by Dahmer as a person and a monster, hence the title of the potential anthology series, which was Monster. So working with Ryan Murphy, the way it works over there, he's obviously got a lot of stuff going on all the time. So he's got one of his trusted contacts, as I was mentioning, is Alexis Woodall, and she basically handles all the producer's cuts up to when she gets it to a place where she thinks it's presentable with him, and that includes it can be a lot of restructuring and any sort of ideas that she wants to try. They get tracked on this special script that gets presented to Ryan when we go through it. The assistants have to help with this workflow where anything that gets changed in the script sort of gets crossed out or notated or moved around, so that when it's presented to him, she's there and she can kind of explain what she's done and why she's done it. And then he obviously responds to that, and we do any number of rounds of notes with him. But the work with him is basically just that you'll go to a screening location and he'll watch it back basically in real time with you, go through his notes, then you leave and you go get back to work.
Now, how do you like to approach your episodes? Because some editors, they choose particular scenes that they like, or some start right at the start, when the whatever footage comes in, obviously, because it's not shot in order. So how do you like to tackle your cuts?
Yeah, I'm an editor that likes to watch all the footage first, because I think, obviously the script is a blueprint for what the story that they're trying to tell, but the footage is telling its own story. And I think as an editor, you have to be open to watching it over and over again, seeing what the actors are changing, seeing what the director's changing, seeing what the camera, the director of photography, and the angles that are chosen, what story is being told best from each given angle. And then that starts to inform, in my mind, just general ideas about what is going to be the most interesting version of this scene, what's going to be the angles that best tell the story or tell the emotion or the tone that we're trying to pull out of the material. So I like to watch through it all, get general ideas about where I want to be when, but nothing too specific, because then you never want to tie yourself in too early to an assumption of the way things have to be, because it's a process of experimenting and discovery that goes over obviously several months through directors and producers cuts and studio cuts. And you always want to try to figure out ways to be open to alternate ways of doing things, and notes that are given to you should always be taken in the spirit of, okay, maybe I have a knee-jerk reaction of I don't agree with this, but there's something behind it, and let me figure out if I can get to what's behind it that can kind of inform a new and interesting way of looking at the scene that maybe hadn't occurred before.
Well, it's interesting because you talked like Alexis makes those notes on the document. Now you're talking about having things that might have to get reorganized. Was there an interesting change that occurred in any of the episodes that you worked on, or something that you thought might not have worked, and then all of a sudden, whatever the suggestion was really worked and you liked it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always big for them and for me as well, is finding tone, wanting it to feel in this particular show, there's always a chance for things to get too heightened and too sensationalized, and you're wanting to bring things back down to a place where it feels like you're being respectful of the story and the victims, and telling it from a very grounded and a very real place, while maintaining as much drama as possible. But there's a lot of things, like for instance, especially when we got into flashback territory of his childhood, it was like, it's just trying to find a balance of how much of that was appropriate to tell the story. Especially, my first episode on it was episode 3, which sort of starts with where we get to see Dahmer's mother dealing with the issues that she had during the pregnancy, and all the pills, the medicines that she was taking, and the way that she was judged for that. And there were a lot of a sequence of scenes that were sort of drawn out and leading to, the beginning, the true beginning of the episode, if you sort of treat that as a cold open. And right off the bat, she had some really great ideas about how do we restructure this? How do we take out pieces that aren't sort of telling the emotional story from A to B of what's happening to the mother in this particular period of time. And then Regis as well had some great ideas about how we could, for instance, stay almost entirely on the man in this scene where they're talking just about the women and saying what's best for the women. And it gave it another level of being a powerful story just through the use of the visuals and intent and very intentional feeling choices that, as a viewer, hopefully you can't help but feel like it's interesting and unique the way they chose to show one part of the scene versus another.
Now, so I really like Ryan Murphy stuff, but depending on the show, it can get gruesome. So,
Yeah.
And I can't deal with gore. So how, as an editor, do you deal with that when you're watching it day after day? Like, how do you keep from being really depressed at the end of the day? Or
Yeah, well, first of all, it was interesting. I mean, I think especially probably Gore is one of the things that would turn people off of watching a show like this, and there was an awareness of that, because again, it sensationalizes it and makes it feel kind of gross to cover this subject if you're just lingering too much on the crimes themselves. So some of the goriest stuff I had ended up hitting the cutting room floor pretty quickly. And I didn't have the goriest of the episodes, which I was grateful for. But ultimately, I think what I realized doing this and what I realized about myself and the editing process is that once you get into it, you know, we react to it early on, just like anyone else would, and feel, you know, in our gut, like that this is just very disturbing. But then you start to break it down into the individual components of, you know, how you're structuring the visuals, how you're working performances, how you're trying to find the tone. And you sort of as an artisan, you end up focusing on it from an almost analytical standpoint of this is how to craft a story. And, you know, you can't totally forget about the impact that it's having in terms of it being disturbing. But on a day-to-day level, just addressing notes and trying to improve scenes little by little, I think it's sort of an analytical approach that helps you with, certainly with this kind of material.
Now, I do want to jump to earlier in your career. You studied at USC, and I'm wondering if you ever studied under Norman Holland.
I did know Norman Holland. I had some meetings with him. I didn't ever, I wasn't ever in one of his classes. But I know him. I met him, and I know him by reputation, which everybody who knows him was like, he was the best guy.
Yeah.
Sadly, no longer with us. Yeah.
All right. And then the other person I'm interested, because you got your assistant editing break when you got started was on Breaking Bad. So did you work under Kelly Dixon at all?
I worked very much in collaboration with Kelly Dixon.
Okay, so
I laugh because she's such a force of nature. It's like, yes, she's such an integral part of that show.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from her. Yeah, but I worked directly with Skip McDonald mostly.
Well, I was going to ask what you learned on the show and from these two, Skip and Kelly.
I mean, I think that there was no better film school really than I was very lucky to end up there early on. And I actually got my start, you said assisting, but I actually got my start before that. It was my second paid job in Hollywood was on Breaking Bad. And I was their post PA for 2 years. And I started to learn, and they were very open. That whole world has fostered an openness all the way from the lowest levels to the highest levels. So the assistants, I obviously started to learn the ropes on assisting from those assistants, and they were very open with letting me sit in and watch how the assistant editing workflow worked. And then the editors, Skip and Kelly, and also Lynn Willingham at the time was still involved, and all three of them were very open with me as well. And they sort of became my first and biggest film family that I still am in touch with every one of them. And when they were in the office, especially right up to when COVID happened, I would, even when I was no longer on Better Call Saul because I had moved on to other editing opportunities, always coming back to try to have lunches with them and all this stuff. But going back to what I learned from, I think both Skip and Kelly are absolutely, I learned the fundamentals of like, this is how you tell a story in the editing room, and seeing what could be done, because Vince Gilligan is also a great editor in his own right, except that he doesn't push the buttons on the computer and wouldn't know how to. But if so, fortunately, nobody's taught him how to use the program, or else he wouldn't even need editors. So in terms of it being the best film school, the chance to just sit behind Skip and watch Vince give notes and sit there and go through each scene by scene, and the things that they could do to just tell a solid story. It was the best possible place to learn the fundamentals, because it's so story focused too, right? Like other places, Kelly used to say when we got back for another season there, it was like, we're really in the Ivy Leagues now. We're back from all those places that are just goofing around, and we're in serious television again. But it was true, because they are just absolutely focused on making the best possible product. And some places you do end up just sort of rescuing the material, which is also a great skill to have. But everything was approached in terms of how can we tell a really, really solid story. And you couldn't get anything by anybody. When I started to cut more scenes for Skip, for instance, and maybe I starting to feel like I knew what I was doing, there would always be some great notes. And I knew in the back of my head, like, oh, I shouldn't have attempted that, because it's not a 10 out of 10. It was only an 8 out of 10 cut, So just through repetition, learning how to cut the best possible version of a scene was what I hopefully started really to learn there.
So how did you make the jump? Because like so many people want to make that jump from the PA to the assistant to the editing chair. So how did you get into the editing chair? Like, what was your transition, or how did you do that?
So, I really have to thank Skip McDonald for really making it happen. And it happened because he's a very generous mentor. And so over the 2 to 3 years that I assisted him, he understood from even before we started working together that I, was an aspiring editor, and that I knew how to use the Avid and all the fundamentals. Obviously, as an assistant, it's good to know how to use the Avid. But it started for like with any assistant, generally you get thrown a scene or two. The editor's like, take these and let's see what you can do with them. And it's obviously never an obligated part of the job, because the editor, it's ultimately the editor's responsibility to put it together. But fortunately, I would keep, as the notes got less and less on individual scenes, I started to say, would it be okay if the scenes I take in the next episode are sort of back to back? So I ended up having a section of an episode that I could say, okay, I cut all this, and it's sort of like a mini episode within the episode that I'm working on, then, combining the scenes together and crafting it, which is also an important part of it. By the time, and because it was such a fostering environment, Vince and Peter and all the directors who came through there were very open with hearing that, okay, an assistant cut this, would you mind if he sits in the chair and does the notes with you guys? Because what I usually tell anybody who's trying to just do that path that I did, moving from assisting to editing, it's like you can know all the editing skill and technique in the world, but until you know how to get notes and enact notes in the room with a producer or director, and get notes from them that you might not agree with, but you have to just be able to think on your feet, and you have to have this open dialogue with them so that you can bring something creative to it without being stuck just doing a note that you're not sure, or you're just sort of stumbling through it. The best possible, the hardest thing to learn when you're making that transition is, the personal part, the interpersonal part of dealing with the other creatives that you have to deal with. And you just don't get to learn that until you've made that jump from, just cutting for yourself to cutting for other people. But anyway, the final part of that jump was that I ended up getting some credits on Better Call Saul and some credits on Fargo on both shows that I shared with Skip McDonald. And it was ultimately Noah's team that knew they were going to need somebody for their new show, Legion. And very early on asked Skip, like, do you think Curtis is ready for it? Skip said yes. And they said, okay, we'll give him a shot on the new show. And then I swear, by the time we got into the new show, I don't know if they realized how hard it was going to be or how outside the box. I'm like, you guys never would have given me this show as my first show if you thought about what a challenging show it was. But I just dove in and I just gave it my all. And by the end of the season, they were like, you really brought it, and we really want you on everything we do, as long as you want to be involved. So that was amazing, and that was a great way to make the jump.
So is there a particular, you've had this really interesting career where you've like, I am jealous of you getting into that environment that's so fostering. So is there a particular scene in your career that, you struggled with, but you were able to work through it, and you're really proud of how the scenes turned out from any of the shows you've worked on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's so many scenes that I've responded to for all sorts of different reasons. There's scenes that it's like, well, that was just such a fun scene to cut, or a funny scene to cut. I would think early on, some of the things that I had to create for Better Call Saul, like right before I made the jump, there were a couple big scenes that I was very, very proud of. And still to this day, it's like, I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, that's some of the most impressive stuff, or the stuff I'm most proud of. Things like when Jimmy was, there was a montage in season 2 where he just basically was copying documents and cutting out pieces of documents and gluing them onto other documents, and then recopying them and creating this whole sort of forged set of documents. And I got to tackle this montage by myself as part of an episode that just Skip was cutting most of it. But I got to tackle that montage, and talk about pure editing, because you're dealing with a subject matter that has no inherent drama, and you have to get into the visuals and create the drama, and you have to create a story of like, okay, he goes through the process once, and then you kind of speed it up to show how so many things, how he does it over and over again, but without taking up all the screen time that would actually take. I still remember that the crew was still talking about the, I think, 40-minute master shot that the director did, like from literally outside the windows of the copy shop. And the crew was like, this is crazy. Why are we shooting 40 minutes outside, with not even inside with the characters? But, all pieces that ended up getting used, and in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do if she hadn't have done that, because you can do time warps and speed effects and just show him, basically a time lapse effect of him running through that place. And another one that I got to do on the finale of season 2 was like, there was a scene where Mike was kind of stalking his prey, his target in the desert with a rifle. And it was all sort of telling the story from showing, it was a tense scene, but it was from his point of view and through a scope, and sort of the whole, again, like creating, I guess what I find fun is creating, drama and story and tone from nothing, from just building blocks that are, it's something that that you have to create it. Like, you can't just rely on a great performance or a super dynamic, set of shots and actions that just inherently make it interesting and entertaining. And then I also have to just give a shout out to my work on Legion, just because for an editor, that was just the perfect playground. And so almost every scene I got to cut on that was like all about coming back to the essentials of tone, but all the other rules sort of fly out the window, right? So you get to break the rules all the time, but you have to still stay focused in terms of like, okay, this isn't just style for style's sake. We're trying to create something that's a subjective experience for the audience of living inside essentially a schizophrenic, crazy person who also happens to have superpowers, magical powers, but we're sort of living inside of his head. So using editing to create the effect of living inside of a schizophrenic superhero's head was very consistently entertaining for me. And I really enjoyed working on that show.
Hey, so I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Recently I've been, the things that I would say I watch to sort of unwind. We like, my wife and I will watch competition reality type things, things like America's Got Talent. But we discovered this really cool little show on Netflix that I don't know how many people are even watching it, but it's called Blown Away. And I think there's 3 seasons now. And it's just so mesmerizing and relaxing when a new season comes out, because the concept is, they're glass blowers who are competing for top glass blowing prize, and it's structured, as a competition reality show, but it's just mesmerizing to watch what they can create out of sand that they heat up in 1,000-degree furnaces, and they just get these wacky, crazy challenges that you expect from reality TV, but they just create these artistic masterpieces that is really fun to watch.
They shoot that in my city. So they shoot it down at Liberty Village, which it used to be all factories there.
Yeah,
like from like
the factory or something.
Yeah, and so when I started in the film industry, there was edit suites over there, and that's where so it's just so weird to be like, oh, now they're shooting a reality show here. But
it's so cool. It's, that's real art. We like to consider ourselves artists sometimes, but it's like I can't do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.